So welcome to those again. The FEST 3 for cargo and commercial ship surveyors. We are coming now to our third but last presentation of the day. Delighted to welcome Bill Brassington, who's going to talk about understanding the CTU Code. Bill sent me a very long bio. I've preceded it down, Bill. I hope I haven't taken out the important bits. So Bill is an independent safety and security consultant in the freight supply chain, with nearly 20 years experience in the container industry. He became an active member of the International Organization for Standardization's Technical Committee 104, Freight Containers, and is now the chairman of the subcommittee responsible for special containers SC2. He's played an important role in developing many standards, including IS 6346, 9897 SC4, as well as the structural and testing standards in SC1, including IS 1496 specification and testing of freight containers, IS 1161 freight containers, corner fittings, and IS 3874 freight containers handling and securing. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, Bill? For the last 6 years, Bill has provided consultancy to the container industry and has developed his skills to cover not only the safety and security of the container, but also has been heavily involved with cargoes that they're carrying. He's the author of the research study Safety in the Supply Chain in relation to packing of containers, published by the International Labour Organization, and he's the consultant editor of the Code of Practice for Packing Cargo Transport Units, CTU Code, for the International Maritime Organization, ILO, and United Nations Economics Commission for Europe. So without further ado, Bill, thank you ever so much for being here today and for agreeing to do this, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thank you for that very kind reading of my bio. It went very well. Yeah. So, as Mike said, I was the consultant author of the CTU Code, and I am working with the IMO, the ILO, and the UNECE at the moment on revising it. Just one moment. Oh, no, it's okay. Sorry, I thought I had a problem going on in the background. It's a great pleasure to make this presentation to the International Institute of Marine Surveyors. I think it's exciting that that you approached me and asked me to make this presentation, because we are experiencing a lot of problem with getting acceptance of the CTU Code globally. And so it is important that we spread the word to as many people as possible, and surveyors and inspectors is probably one of the most useful avenues we've got for proposing and getting the code read around the world. So let's go forward. The first question is, what is a CTU? I know you're all gasping to find out. Well, basically it's divided into three basic categories. So we have box CTUs, flat CTUs, and tank CTUs. That may not help you anymore. So I've got some pictures. Pictures say 1,000 words. And all of these, well, so we've got containers, road vehicles, and rail wagons. And you'll notice, of course, the two rail wagons on the bottom left-hand corner are actually models, but I like the pictures, so I've used them in the presentation. All of these are cargo transport units. And a cargo transport unit basically means anything that can be carried on anything else. So obviously a container can be carried on a truck, on a ship, or on a rail wagon. A truck can be carried on a rail wagon and a ferry, and a rail wagon can be carried on a ferry. So they are all under the definition of a cargo transport unit, transport cargo units. So we're talking about all types of things, but primarily people look at the the container itself and think that is the only what a cargo transport means. It actually means all types. We start off with where we got to. In 1985, the IMO and the ILO, that's the International Maritime Organization and the International Labour Organization, produced some guidelines for packing freight in containers or vehicles. Very interesting document, very short. And in 1990 and 1994, they revised the wording. These were very much internal documents that the IMO and the ILO had, but nobody else seemed to know. But then in 1997, the UNECE, which is the UN organization responsible for international in land-based transport, joined in, and they produced a tripartite, or the three UN organizations, 1997 guidelines for packing cargo transport units. And this became the infamous Blue Book. Again, it wasn't terribly well circulated, and eventually it went out of print. But in 2011, the IMO at the Marine Safety Committee decided that they wanted to update the section of the guidelines covering dangerous goods. And they produced a document that says, made some suggestions, but they were told quite unceremoniously by the other two partners that they couldn't do anything since the document was a 3 UN agency document. They had to wait. In the same year, I was commissioned to carry out a research project into looking at safety in the supply chain related to packing containers, and frankly it was not a good thing. There was lots of misunderstandings and poor packing procedures and all sorts of different exercises going on, which made it impossible for people to follow properly. And the output from that was that there should be a new revision of the guidelines. And at the first meeting of the group of experts, we agreed that we should change from a code of practice to, from a guideline to a code of practice, which in 2014 we published the new code of practice, and we also published a circular by the IMO on informative materials. We'll come on to that a bit later on. In 2016, we also had a new resolution passed within the IMO affecting SOLAS, which looked at verified gross mass, VGM, and that came into force. Now, VGM basically requires that shippers are required to provide the gross mass of the container before it can be loaded on board a ship. And the reason we had to do that related to, or came from this, the MSC Napoli. As you can see, when the Napoli was grounded off the south coast of England, they recovered with great difficulty 660 containers stowed on deck, which remained dried, and they were weighed. And 20% of the containers were found to be more than 3 tons different from their declared mass. And the largest single one was 20 tons, as it shows on the graphics. that means that a container was declared as empty but was actually packed. And if you look, the total mass of the 137 containers found to be a different declared mass was 312 tons, which is 2.2. And the little graphic on the right shows that the tear mass of a average 20-foot container is just over 2,100 kilos. So there is a lot of problems associated with the declaration of mass, and it relates basically many times to the cargo inside rather than the gross mass. So let's go on. The guidelines were produced to help the safe packing of CTUs and securing it with inside. It was written with a very light touch, a bit comical, some interesting drawings and sketches, and it was fairly lightweight. There was only 60 pages, I think, in total. It was A5, and the IMO published 1,000 copies, which took about 15 years to dispose of. And so when you consider the number of people that are potentially packing cargo transport units, they weren't terribly well, it wasn't terribly well taken on. As a guideline, it is just a guide. There is no power of enforcement, and packers saw it as an unnecessary publication and therefore could be ignored. By changing it to a code of practice, we provide a tool for governments and other organizations to allow them to build national or international regulations, or actually have something a little bit more enforceable. In many countries, if it is the code of practice has been produced by the industry, and therefore if it comes to a court case, then the code of practice could be taken as legally binding. So we now I've sort of got a few pictures which looks at what happens when lashing and securing inside cargo transport units doesn't work. Steel collars are very popular. Granite and marble is another issue that regularly comes up just because of the density and the mass of the cargo being carried. In the case of this picture that on the left-hand side, it was a 5-ton generator, and the packers said it's so heavy it'll never move. Well, clearly it did. And we get lots of poor packing, including containers being dropped from spreaders. Ultimately, containers are lost overboard, and the World Shipping Council has published a list of containers lost overboard, and it's not that many. It's a very, very small percentage, less than 1/100 of 1% of those containers that are transported around the world. But one container being lost overboard is probably one too many, especially if it's carrying something particularly nasty. Now, the next slide is a bit squeamish for those who are not prepared. So if you not want to watch, please look away now. So that last video was obviously from a container or a CTU holding steel coils approaching a toll booth, and the lashing and securing of the cargo was totally insufficient. And here we've got a number of, I'm looking at now the supply chain risks, the transport chain risks, and this picture shows a container train where it completely derailed and fell off the rails. The train was, I think, 8.5 kilometers long, and they lost quite a lot of them. It was caused primarily by a container that was badly packed and caused the one of the rear carriages to derail. Again, trucks are liable to overturn. In the UK, there are a number of roundabouts where containers coming out of ports have been known to overturn. And one of the issues that the UK police came up with, they blamed the driver for driving too fast round the corner of the roundabout, but it's actually related to poor packing and poor stability of the cargo load. It's a big problem, big issue. Here we've got some interesting practices. How they got the top right-hand tractor inside the container is open to speculation. Actually, what they did is they put it on some cardboard and slid it in, but it is not secured and probably would have damaged the container during transport. Placing a car on top of a number of drums, well, and securing it down with 2 straps, not terribly sufficient. And the other examples are obviously shows very, very poor packing. And this is a real case where the cargo had just been placed in at one end, and when they opened the doors, the blocks fell out. And what happened was somebody was quite badly injured when the door flew open. What then happened, they cleared some of it away. And then when the investigators came along, they had to sort of reproduce it to generate this picture. And one of the most severe problems that we experience is cargo fire. And we don't always know what's inside a container or a cargo transport unit. And sometimes the application of water can actually make the fire worse. In this case, they were spraying the container with water, and the cargo inside loved water and obviously continued to get worse. And here is a very famous fire. This is the MSC Flamidia, where some tanks carrying some hazardous cargo overheated and caused $580 million worth of damage. It took a long time for the fire to be extinguished. 3 people were killed, and the investigation took 5 years and was eventually finished in the court in New York a couple of years ago. And as an independent safety consultant, I have looked at a number of incidents, and these again are real incidents where a cyclist was crushed by a poorly packed container when the road vehicle overturned. They were just cycling along, the truck went past it, it actually tripped up on the curb, bounced, and then fell on the truck. the cyclist as they were driving past. A terminal tug driver, that's the man who drives the internal trailers around. He was crushed when the poorly packed container that was being transported dislodged. Had it not been poorly packed and stayed on the trailer, he would have come away with bends and bruises, but actually the container itself jumped off the trailer and fell on him. And a truck driver killed when the cargo came through the cab. This happens far too often. One of the first incidents I was involved in was a truck driver carrying steel tubes, large diameter steel tubes, and he braked, and the steel tube came through the cab and out through the front. The policeman who first arrived there had suffered for many years as a result of that one. And what I fear, a high-speed train crashing into a container from a derailed wagon. In the UK, we had 3 serious derailments of containers due to poorly packed cargo. And then we had a derailment on the approaches to the Leavesden Tunnel near Watford. And northbound trains approaching through the tunnel would have been unable to have seen the derailed train until it was too late. Those were that could have caused many hundreds of injuries and possible fatalities. So it is very, very important that the cargo is properly secured, packed and secured. So, questions. This is the blue book, and if we had a chat session on here, we could ask, how many people have actually aware of the old blue guidelines. The reality of it, not many people were. And then we could ask how many people have actually used it. And again, most people will probably say not at all. And the ILO guideline, that is even worse. Nobody seems to know about that. The people that get involved about it say, oh, that looks like it's interesting reading. It's still available from the from the ILO. If you so wish, it's a good read, even if I say so myself. In that, Table 5 identified the research that I looked at for seeing the awareness and using, and you can see the take-up, the use of it was very, very poor in all sorts of categories. Strangely enough, the health and safety executives in the UK's health, safety and road haulage was the one that most people had actually heard of, and that included international respondents. So it is, people were unaware. They weren't very happy with what they were using, and more often than not, they've done it for so many years, they didn't need to be told. So then we produced the CTU code, and I hope now all of you saying, oh, I know all about that. It's great. And you're using it, and you know about the informative material, and you're using it too. I can hear through the ether that you're all saying, yes, that's right, or not. So here we have the chapters of the Code of Practice. There are 13 chapters, 39 pages, that's 3 pages each. It's quite short, and basically it gives some very useful information. On top of that, we have the annexes. Now this is another 86 pages, and that provides much more detail in parts of the packing and the securing process. Don't worry, we'll be coming back to this again. And then we have the informative material, and this was developed because it's useful to assist people in it, but it was just too much work for the group of experts to complete within the time frame. So it was left as informative material and was published by the IMO. And there are 10 informative materials, and they show some of the issues that we've tried to relate it. And they are very useful information. It's really good bedtime reading, and there's only 185 pages in that lot. So let's return back to the code of practice. Well, how we've split it down is there is informative materials that's looking at the various information in each chapter. In instruction, it refers to the consequences of improper packing. In the chains of responsibility and information, we have the annexes that covering information flow, safe handling of CTUs, and the documents related to transport. Condensation is a huge cause of damage, and we've got information in the annex on that one. And the CTU properties, got information on the approval plates, and there is a large section looking in the informative material 3 at the different types of CTU. Just in itself, that's a useful piece of information. On arrival, packing is not just about putting the stuff in the cargo, it's also about taking the stuff out. So people that when a CTU arrives, they have to check that it is acceptable. And one of the most important things in these days is the minimizing of risk of recontamination from species of piggyback species on alien species. We've all heard of the gypsy moth, which travels around the world and decimates crops around the world. It is a really big issue, and the Code of Practice covers this as well. And obviously we get onto the packing of cargo transport units, and there is an annex covering that. It's the most important, probably one of the most important, and within that annex there are a number of appendices which helps the packers work out, what the packing mark should be on the packages, friction factors, lots of information on specific packing and securing calculations. So a lot of useful information. There's some working and height guidance, and then there's a couple of informative materials looking at the quick lashing guide. Load distribution, very important, and transport of perishable goods. All useful stuff for helping the packer do his job properly. What to do when you finish packing the CTU. There's a big section on seals. That's custom seals, not the furry ones that swim around in the sea. And then advice on the receipt and unpacking of CTUs, very important, as I say. And lastly, we have a training package or guidelines for what the training package should be. There are very few training packages available, but there are some. So I hope you're following me so far. And the next question is, what does it mean to your institute and to you, the audience? the first thing is we have access to the CTU code itself, and it is available on the CTU, on the UNECU website. And if you click on it, it will come up with, I'll just bring it across, CTU code, and this shows the various sections, and you can click on each of these chapters and it will take you down to the appropriate page. So chapter 7, CTU, just so happens it's not really working, just my luck. Oh well, never mind. But it should work. So let's go back. Okay, so there is a United Nations ECE website, which is a very useful tool if you haven't got it, but it can be downloaded as well. There are some important sections, and chapter 4 is a very important one, which deals with the chains of responsibilities and the information. And the chain of responsibility is, there it is written up there. It means basically that everyone within the transport chain has a responsibility to ensure that the CTU is prepared, is packed, is transported, is delivered, and is unpacked safely. And that responsibility is important, and it's trying and to impress the need for compliance. And there is, within that, we're trying to identify a number of functions. Now, functions are the role that people undertake. The first one is the CTU operator, which is the person who, or the organization that provides the CTU. That may be a shipping line, it may be a road hauling company, it may be a leasing company, whatever. But it is the person who provides it to the packer to do the work. Then we have the consigner, the packer, and the shipper. Now, these may all be the same organization. The shipper, the consigner, the consolidator, freight forwarder, and the packer could be all the same organization, but each has a different role, a different function within the organization. And the CTU differentiates between the shipper and the packer. And then we go on, road haulier, rail haulier, intermodal operator. That basically means anybody that's moving a CTU from one mode to another. Typically it's a port, but it could be a railhead terminal. It could be a road haulage base where a trailer is brought in by one operator and then put onto another and transferred that way. A carrier is normally considered to be the shipping line carrying it overseas, either locally or internationally. And the consignee, obviously the buyer, the recipient of the cargo. But it doesn't include, there are no functional descriptions for inspectors and the insurers. And that was seen as a deficiency within the code, because they have a very important role to play. And the IMO produced a checklist to assist in people who are developing best practice buying systems, which includes looking to ensure that inspectors, insurers, and customs organisations carried out their role correctly. As a consultant author to the CTU code, I'm very keen to see that more people become aware of the code, and many organisations are doing their bit. And this is an example of one. The 5 groups: the Container Owners Association, the Global Shippers Forum, ICHCA International, the TT Club, and the World Shipping Council came together to produce what they called the CTU Code, a quick guide, which is a route map for the broad industry to engage more successfully with the CTU Code. And there's also a checklist to help packers to ensure that they have carried out all of their responsibility correctly. It's a very good document, and if you search online, you'll find it. Certainly the TT Club have it. And within the CTU Code, they use this diagram, which I produced for them, and it shows the various, the transport chain from the CTU operator and the manufacturer all the way through to the consignee. And the CTU Code is aimed at the packers, the freight forwarders and the consolidators, to make sure that they do their job properly, so that the other functions in the the transport chain can do theirs. But it is also important to remember that the inspectors and surveyors have a very important role to play in doing this, making sure that containers are properly packed. The TT Club analysis showed 66% of incidents was caused by or exacerbated by poor packing, which resulted in $6 billion worth of loss or cost to the transport industry. Now, $6 billion may relate to lost cargo, but is also related to poorly the consequential loss as well. Some people feel if they lose some the cargo, that's good for them because they just have to rebuild it. But actually, one of the problems is if they don't secure it properly, it may not be just rebuilding or replacing the cargo that is important. It may be replacing someone's life. And I stress that's very important. So the code has some important key requirements, the do's and the don'ts, which are in chapter 3. The chains of responsibility, as I mentioned earlier on, are very important. And then we've got chapter 9, annex 7, and informative materials 5 and 6, which all relate to packing and securing the cargo. And these are all essential reading for packers and for the surveyors and inspectors who are confirming that the work has been done, or checking to see that it has been done, or during inspections following an incident, identifying what they haven't done wrong. So it is a very important document. I love these diagrams, which look great and don't sort of say an awful lot. This is the virtuous control cycle. Basically, how do we make sure that the cargo is properly packed? And first of all, knowing who your customer is and what they're likely to do is very, very important. To ensure that the cargo has been packed properly, X-rays and automated cargo screening are very important and can be used to confirm whether or not containers have been, or cargo transport units have been properly secured, and that the cargo is properly distributed within the cargo transport units. There are now tools that have been produced to check whether or not the dangerous goods that have been, or the cargo that's been declared is a dangerous good, or whether or not it is a pseudonym for a dangerous good. And that allows the inspectors to go along and say, oh yes, this is a dangerous good by another name and therefore should be treated differently. And then of course there are inspections which are carried out by the customs authorities and by CTU operators and independent inspectors. And there's the Internet of Things, that wonderful new term, IoTs, where measurement devices on CTUs can be used to ensure that the cargo is doing what it's supposed to be. And this is all backed up by enforcement, usually by customs authorities, but also by other enforcement organisations such as the Port State Control, who will ensure that the CTU has been properly packed. But ultimately, it's about each of the functional roles, each of the stakeholders within the transport chain having trust that the other members of the other stakeholders have truthfully provided the information, and what they have provided is actually proper, and that there is nothing, there is a total transparency between the passing of information between one party and the other, so that everyone really understands how important it is to have proper documentation, proper declarations. So, packing, securing, and its inspectors and surveyors have probably the greatest role in ensuring that these tasks are done. The understanding that parties have when it comes to securing, one packer may believe something and carry out a practice that they're happy with, while others may look at exactly the same. And what the surveyors and inspectors can do is come along and say, well, you know, what we hadn't really thought about is this or that. And understanding where the forces that are involved in transporting cargo around the world. As an example, a container ship moving from the north coast of Europe to the east coast of America will roll approximately 186,000 times. And every single one of those rolls will be loosening the lashing and securing. So the earlier case where we looked at a generator coming loose, this was at sea. The vertical acceleration of a ship pitching in the North Sea can result in the cargo becoming weightless.
Sorry about that, Bill.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So a cargo can become weightless, and whilst it is weightless, it's literally floating around inside the container, waiting for the ship to roll. And what happened was, on that particular instance, the ship hit an incredibly large wave. It pitched over the edge of the waves and rolled over the edge of the wave. So the ship went down, the generator stayed in the air, and the container rolled over to bang into the side of it. The consequence of that was it came through the side of the container, and it made it very difficult to unload the container at the end. So understanding the needs for properly securing a cargo inside the CTU, using the correct materials, but most of all, as we all know, planning makes perfect packing. If we plan what we're going to pack, how we're going to pack, and use the correct materials and use the correct techniques, then we are probably going to allow the cargo to arrive at its destination without damage. And of course, the other feature we have to remember is that cargo sometimes isn't always packed in packages. We have increasing numbers of containers carrying bulk liquids or bulk solids, and each of these have their own packing problems, not only with the declaration of the mass, but also with liquefaction or free surface effect. So all of these needs a good inspector to be able to say, have you considered this?
Bill, it's Mike. It's Mike. Can I jump in with a question for you that Ed has asked?
Yeah.
How does lashing guidance in the CTU Code compare to lashing guidance in Annex 13 of the CSS Code with regard to lashing break bulk cargoes on flat racks?
It's very similar. In fact, there is a lot we took in the CTU Code out of the CSS Code. Obviously, lashing on deck, which the CSS Code is related to, or in holds, relates to that. But the forces, the friction factors, and much of the information in the CSS Code has been taken forward. However, the CSS Code is slightly out of date, and we have been, within the ISO, been saying to the IMO they need to revise elements of the CSS Code. So there is a lot of similarities, yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay. So it is important that when we are considering packing and securing, that everybody is working safely, is working securely. We are ensuring that we are not allowing alien insects and animals and bugs transferring from one country to another, and we're not permitting the packing or securing of any other improper cargoes. We get a fire on board a ship, I think once every 2 weeks, every year. Sometimes it's only small, sometimes it's a lot larger. 2020 and 2019 had a large number of very, very serious fires, which involved either charcoal or I forgot the name of it. A particular cargo that's used for swimming pools, which has been declared, which self-heats and ignites, both of which self-heats and ignite. So it is very important that these we do ensure that the work is declared properly. And it is basically, it is a partnership for inspectors and surveyors with customers to make sure that whenever there's packing going on, that they are aware of what's going on with the packers and the shippers, to ensure that the proper information is passed one between the other, between the shippers and the carriers, to ensure that the proper information is passed on, and ultimately that the cargo is packed and transported in compliance with the CTU Code. It is an essential part of reducing the number of containers that are lost overboard. It is essential to reduce the number of vehicles overturning. In the United States, in 2007, 18,000 trucks fell over on straight line accidents due to poor containers or poor packing within the trailer. That is a huge number of incidents. In the UK, one of the things, whenever I'm driving, I say to anyone is never overtake a container vehicle where when it's going around a corner, because you don't know how well it's secured, the cargo is secured inside it. The driver is probably unaware how well it's secured inside it, and suddenly one of the things I don't want to do is to find a trailer falling over on top of me. It is that important because I want to come home every night. Everyone has a right to go home every night, and the CTU code is helping to reduce that or to improve that, ensuring people do go home. So that's it for those that have. Thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, Mike, I'm quite happy to answer them.
Bill, fabulous. Thank you very much. It's always nice to come across someone who's an expert in their subject, and you really are an expert in your subject. So do you eat, sleep and breathe CTU code?
I do indeed.
Yeah, no, remarkable. So thank you for a fascinating and informative presentation. Does anybody have any questions particularly for Bill? You've stunned everyone into silence, Bill. So.
Absolutely.
I think.
I mean, it's a question. Can I ask a question of any of your audience? You know, how many people are aware of the CTU code?
I don't know. Let's ask. So, anybody online there familiar with the CTU code? Doesn't know much about it?
Ooh.
No, we've got, yeah, I am, says Ed. So there's one. The rest are too shy. Bill, am I right in thinking you're going to write something for the report magazine for March for me?
I am indeed, yes. I've started writing it, and I will have something over to you fairly shortly. Yeah. I think it is a subject that I think is poorly understood, and perhaps there are people who don't really understand the need or why we have it, and I think sometimes it is just a step too far for some people to understand first time round. But it is freely available online. And, you know, if you just want 5 minutes, please do go and download it from either the UNEC website or the IMO website or anywhere else. It's available freely. Certainly download the CTU code, a quick guide from the TT Club. They are very useful, and they will start people thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So Manif says yes, he's aware of it. John says I've heard of it, but good to hear more. Chris says yes, I use it. Rudolph says I'm familiar. So yeah, you know, there's some knowledge out there.
Yeah.
But do watch out for the March report magazine next year, and you can read a bit more detail about it. So, Bill, thank you very much. It's been great to have you here, and thanks for giving up your time.